Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about these fellas right here. That's right, the Sig P320, specifically the trigger and the fire control group. I'm going to break down how that trigger actually works. So if you are looking at the 320 with all of the stuff that's gone on, you can make a more informed decision on if it's going to be the one for you. Now, if this is your first time here, consider subscribing, turn those bell notification icons on, and if you find this informational, helpful, or whatever, just go ahead and give that video a thumbs up. Now, I was not a fan of the 320s when they first came out because I just did not like the way they feel. And then there was that whole issue with the trigger, which we know exists. I know somebody's gonna leave it in the comments down below. You can search all over the internet and find out the information on either lawsuits or see video of the original P320 going off when it wasn't supposed to. So fast forward a couple years and a couple lawsuits later, there is an updated version of the trigger system. After I got my hands on an RXPX carry, which is where I harvested this slide from to put on the P80 frame, I actually liked it enough to where I went out and I bought the full-size version right here. And I like that one enough to where I actually went out and bought another slide and a barrel to actually build another one based off of that new fire control unit from Sig. And as you could probably see on my X Carry Full, I do have the Apex trigger in there, and I will say I trust the people over at Apex absolutely. So when they tell me their trigger is safe, I take them at their word because I've seen how they test these things personally, and it's pretty gnarly. But I get questions all the time on how I feel about carrying them. Are they reliable? Is the trigger safe? All of that stuff. Now, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what has happened or what may be ongoing. That information is out there. Feel free to dig it up. I just want this to be an informational video so you can determine, do you trust this? Do you want it to look into it? Or is it gonna be something that you feel comfortable carrying? So without wasting any more of your time, make sure you guys are subscribed, turn those bell notification icons on, but we are gonna get into this trigger and explain it to you guys so you can make a decision right now. All right, we're gonna talk about the big bad Sig trigger right here. So this is the updated version. This is the way this came. It wasn't sent in for machining. This is the modern trigger that comes in the P320. So I have one broken down so we can see what the striker components are, and we will break this one down so you can see what the fire control unit components are that correspond with the striker group. So people often say lack of trigger shoe safety, okay? Yes, doesn't have a trigger shoe safety, so they say that if something works its way down into the trigger guard, that it could release the striker. That's the same with anything out there in the striker fired market. If something gets in there and it has enough pressure to pull the trigger back, it's gonna have enough pressure to pull the manual trigger safety. Is that an added benefit of security and safety? Yes, it is, but it is a mechanical device that can be overcome. So let's talk about what's going on actually inside of this pistol. We will break this down, and we're gonna talk about the frame first and what is going on here so you guys can really understand how this trigger truly functions. So obviously there's nothing else to talk about at the trigger because there is no trigger shoe safety. But when we get up into the actual working mechanisms of the trigger, you're gonna see this part right here is your disconnector, kind of like the Glock connector that kicks over. And then this right here is your striker block safety release, that little arm that goes all the way up. And this is your sear surface. You'll see it has two edges, the first one and a second one. This is gonna catch should the striker ever override that one. So as you pull the trigger, this arm is gonna come up, release the safety on the striker body itself. That's gonna get released and the sear is gonna drop down, allow the striker to go forward. The round goes off, the slide is gonna cycle backwards. This arm right here, you'll hear the click as it gets pushed down. That's what resets the trigger, allows the striker, or excuse me, allows the sear to come back up, the striker grabs it, and you have a reset trigger. So the corresponding stuff up in the slide, this is your full striker right here. This is your striker block, your inertial safety. That little fella spring right there is what gives it the spring to come up and down as you're manipulating the trigger. And then this is your striker lug, striker spring. This is your striker body and the actual striker itself. There is a little tiny return spring up in here. Don't lose that, it's a pain in the butt. So as you're pulling that trigger and that little arm is moving up and down, it is disconnecting this part of the safety right here. And I'll move this down to show you guys about what the distance is. It's about 1/16 of an inch before it allows it to go all the way forward. You'll see it's a two-piece body once it moves right there. So you see that's about how much it takes. When I push it back, you'll see it pop back up. Okay, so that's how much that little blade is moving when it engages and disengages on the edge in there that allows the striker to go forward. So there are a couple of different safeties built into, there is a safety built into that, and then there are safeties built into the fire control unit itself. Obviously this arm that disconnects that safety, on the original version, my understanding is that was free floating, so that could move on its own. That does not move on its own now unless you are actively pulling the trigger, and then it will go up. So that is definitely different from the original versions, and that is part of that inertial safety as well. There also have been multiple changes to the trigger shoe weight design, and that's to help with inertia should this be dropped at a weird angle, hit like that, and you combine the weight of this, combine the weight of the striker, combine the weight of the striker block safety. Would that allow that trigger to go off, or allow the trigger to go back and allow the striker to go forward, allowing that to go off? Like I said, I just wanted to explain to you guys how that actual trigger system works in here so you guys can make a more informed decision. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Now, I hope all of that made sense to you. So there are a couple of different things going on, not only in the fire control unit, but up in the striker body with that striker block safety as well. There are definitely big changes between the original trigger and the triggers that are coming in the SIGs now. Everything from the weight of the trigger shoe to the weight of the small parts, how the small parts work, the striker block safety release being locked into place until you manipulate the trigger. A bunch of things have changed. It's really up to you to determine, do you trust this brand? Do you trust the trigger? And is it something you want to look into? I personally have not had any problems. And like I said, I have seen how Apex tests their stuff, and I trust them completely when I've talked to them personally and they've told me that their trigger systems are absolutely safe. Now, I didn't ask them how much they beat on the factory trigger, but they did tell me that they had noticed several different ongoing changes within the SIG fire control unit and the trigger system since that was originally released. Now, I do know people that carry SIG only, specifically the 320, and I know some of them have tens of thousands of rounds through their 320s with that trigger update, and they've never had an issue with it. They have at times attempted to make that thing go off with a brass casing and just a primer in it, and they were not able to make it defeat all of the safeties in the modern trigger setup. Again, like I said, I just wanted to speak from my experience and kind of show you how all of that stuff works, so you guys can make an informed decision on whether or not that is going to be for you. As far as everything out there that's going on lawsuit-wise or new information or new instances, some of those have been found out to be valid. Some of them have found out to be user error or equipment error. And I think there is still some stuff that is ongoing. Now, as far as my relationship with SIG, I don't have one. I've never contacted them. They've never reached out to me. I just kind of like the 320 series, and that's just kind of where things are. But being that I just get so many questions, specifically on the modern SIGs, now that I've gotten more into them, I really wanted to break that down and give you guys the information that you need going forward. So you guys get out there, have some fun, use that information as you see fit. Remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. That's right. If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. I will see you guys on the next one.